Start, not 2 minutes, but to give the wait staff a chance to clear the tables, because when our speaker comes up to speak, we like to have it very quiet, unless you want to give a giant round of applause. It's my pleasure right now, and for those, how many, I said this yesterday, this is going to be a new tradition. How many, this is the first time you've been to a City Club luncheon? Raise your hand. There's no prize, by the way, just raise your hand. Okay. Well, congratulations, because you're in for a treat. We now have the president of the City Club of Chicago, who will introduce a few people, based, of course, on the Dan Rostenkowski rule, a rule which we hold firm. Jay will explain it. It is my pleasure to introduce Jay Doherty, president of the City Club of Chicago.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Paul. Now, the people are fortunate because they're not part of the 937 people on the waiting list. So thank you very much for coming. Again, thanks for coming. Before I introduce our distinguished speaker, I did want to acknowledge a few people. What he's referring to, Alderman Gabinski, about Chairman Rostenkowski is he would say if you mention their name, they will join. He said it was an economics lesson. And let's give a round of applause to Alderman Gabinski, 32nd Ward. Thank you for being here. There's so many of us involved in government and politics, but there's someone here who's gone to the top in government. He was Chief of Staff to Mayor Richard J. Daley for 8 years, in the same capacity for Mayor Michael Blandick for 2, and then went to the Board of Trade as president for 18 of his 22 years there. We're very honored to have with us Tom Donovan. Tom, thank you for being with us today. I would bet that the vast majority of the people in this room read several newspapers. But I would also bet that the first paper they read every morning is the Chicago Sun-Times. We're very honored to have with us the owner of the Sun-Times, Jim Tyree. Jim, thank you for being with us. I get a lot of the credit for all these wonderful events, but it really is our board of directors, Anne Marie St. Germain, Paul Green, and others. If you're a director, why don't you just stand up and we can give you a round. Martha Janto, thank you very much to them. And thank you to the incomparable Dawn Clark Netch for joining us today. Dawn, stand up, let everybody see you. Let's see. Oh, Father McGrath, president of Loyola Academy up on the North Shore. Let's give him a round of applause for that wonderful, wonderful invocation. Thank you. A couple of months ago, we had a great speaker, and he said he's coming back. And he has a digital arts vocational college, which is fantastic. It's called Tribeca Flashpoint. He's the owner and he runs it, Howard Tullman. Howard, stand up, because these people may be interested in what you're up to. It's a phenomenal deal. Commissioner of the Environment, City of Chicago, Suzanne Malik McKenna. Commissioner, thanks for being with us. Cubs fan, 49th Ward Alderman Joe Moore. Alderman? Oh, Paul is reminding me, you have these question forms. There'll be a lot of questions. Start thinking about them and get them up here as soon as our speaker's done. A couple more. Let's see. Who do we have here? On a personal note, I want to thank our speaker today for his support of the Special Olympics, and particularly in helping steer in the right direction. My colleague over there, Skinny Sheehan. Skinny, where are you? There we go. Thank you very much. The Chief of Staff for the Chicago Public Schools, Adam Case. Adam, where are you? Where we go? Oh, Adam, stand up. There we go. And the Chief Financial Officer, Diana Ferguson. Diana, where are you? There we go. Thank you for being with us. Commissioner Bridget Gaynor, is she here? Oh, Bridget Gaynor. Bridget, stand up. She is a commissioner of Cook County, and I can tell you, she is a real champion of the little guy. People that don't have fancy lobbyists and corporate lawyers and all that stuff, she stands up for them, and I applaud you. Thank you very much, Commissioner. Yeah, and her father, Bill Gaynor, great city clubber. All right. Mr. Education, Art Berman. Senator, where are you? There we go. One of the sponsors today, AT&T, Kim McCullough. Kim, where are you? And Everett Rand, head of the Restaurant Association. You really can't run an organization without having great corporate support. And first among equals in that area, since I've been president, has been Exelon and Commonwealth Edison. We're very honored to have with us today Ruth Ann Gillis. Ruth Ann, thank you. Chancellor City Colleges, Cheryl Hyman. Cheryl, where are you? Right, there we go, thank you. A suburban Republican who really does care about schools. He's spoken here, done a fantastic job, Senator Kirk Dillard. Senator, where are you? There we go. Oh, yeah. Chief Administrative Officer, Chicago Public Schools, Bob Runcie. Bob, where are you? There we go. Thank you. Jim Franzek. Jim, stand up. You've been sick, now you're well. Come on, stand up. The mayor's labor guy. Thank you. Just one final thing. I mentioned Terry Gabinski, but one of our great City Club members, Dan Rostenkowski, passed away a few weeks ago. And Alderman Gabinski got up in front of this church with all of his friends and his family and gave the best speech that I have ever heard, Father McGrath, in a church. He was fantastic, and I applaud you. Alderman Gabinski, thank you for being with us. Did I forget anybody? Our guest today is the Chief Executive Officer of the Chicago Public Schools. He was appointed 18 months ago. Prior to that, our guest today served as President of the Chicago Transit Authority. From 2005 to 2007, he was Mayor Daley's Chief of Staff. Our guest today was a member of the Chicago Police Department for 9 years, where he was a beat cop on some of the toughest streets in the city of Chicago. He was born in Tel Aviv, Israel, and raised in LaGrange, Illinois. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back the CEO of the Chicago Public Schools, Ron Huberman. Ron?
Thank you, Jay. Have some fun. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really exciting to be back at City Club so many different times. I thought this would be a really good opportunity, since we've got folks like Kate Grossman and Rosalind Rossi from the Sun-Times in the room, Jim, to talk about what a dear, personal, close friendship you and I have had. We know each other for years. I consider you so close, right? While we may not have talked in the last several months, it doesn't mean that I don't think of you as a dear best friend. We're so excited to have you at the Sun-Times. But it's really exciting to be up here as the CEO of the Chicago Public School System today. I have the list, because I had one of my staff of writing all of the team members from the Chicago Public School who are here in the audience, because I was going to announce them. But the list is so long that it would eat up all of the time that I have today to speak. So I'm going to ask them all to stand up, because it's truly a wonderful team. So if you're part of CPS, if you could stand up so I could recognize and give everyone a round of applause. Great, thank you very much. All of the folks who stood up all work countless hours, weekends, nights. They're the folks that make the organization work. And I could never be here today talking about anything that we've done or are doing without their long hours, dedication, and care. And so I thank all of them sincerely for being able to represent them here today and for everything that they do. I also want to just quickly recognize, I don't believe she's able to be here because she has, I say, four full-time jobs. But my true partner in this is Mary Richardson-Lowry, who's the president of the board. And so I just want to stop and recognize Mary, because she is in her close to 6 months tenure as president of the board, making a wonderful, wonderful difference in the Chicago Public School System. And I couldn't ask for a better board president to work with. And I want to also just echo what Jay said and recognize Cheryl Hyman here to my right. Because not only do we work out at the same gym, and we see each other there and we're both sweating, and I'm like, is it from the workout or the job? But we're both there We see each other very much as partners in education, and how City Colleges and CPS is going to work in the future, I think, thanks to her leadership, will look dramatically different than it probably does today. I'm going to give a little bit of different remarks today than many of you are probably used to me giving. I'm usually here with the PowerPoint talking stats and statistics. But I can tell you that a year and a half into this job, it struck me that to really capture all of the dynamics, I'm going to need a little more discipline in what I say. And as I reflected and sat down to put together what my remarks would be, it struck me that I needed to really try to frame the complexities of the issues of public education in Chicago, to lay out in a very precise way what needs to happen to improve outcomes for our kids. So it's going to be a little bit different today relative to many of the remarks that many of you are probably used to hearing me give so much. As you probably know, we're right now in the middle of our back-to-school program, and almost a third of our students are already back to schools thanks to changing of the school calendar. And this upcoming Tuesday, the bulk of the rest of our kids are going to be back in school. I really see this as an exciting and hopeful time, and we're looking forward to what I think will be a great school year at CPS. I've had the privilege of being the CEO now for a year and a half at CPS. If you take a look at it, it's been a time marked by political instability in Springfield, a fiscal crisis in our state and nation, and violence in our communities. With that as a backdrop, every single day, nearly 410,000 children and young adults are walking through our doors. We have a responsibility to see them graduated, prepared for college, and the global economy. In the last 15 years, since mayoral control of CPS was established, I think we've made tremendous strides. Test scores have increased. Graduation rate today is significantly higher than it was in '95. The district continues to lead the nation reform efforts, including establishing executive control, closing failing schools, creating brand new school turnaround models, piloting efforts to create real and meaningful teacher evaluation. Those achievements weren't easy, and I don't think that anyone should take them for granted. It's my job now to build on the hard-won successes of my predecessors, the work that Paul Vallis and Arnie Duncan did when they were leading the district. The statistics make clear the challenges that we face, and I could talk about many statistics, but let me just highlight a few. And as I talk about these statistics, let me ask all of you to reflect on your own high school experience. 45% of the students who enter the Chicago public school system will not graduate from high school. Now put yourself in your own high school situation and imagine almost half your class that you started with never graduating high school. Only 30% of our graduates that do graduate will ultimately enroll in college, and less than half of them will actually continue to graduate college. So think about that. We're getting half of our students to our first finish line, which is high school graduation. From there, only a third of those that got there will go on to college, and as I said, only half of them will graduate from a four-year institution. Those are pretty dramatic statistics, and one that I think is a renewed call to arms for all of us to fundamentally change the way education works in Chicago. Too many of our neighborhood schools are failing, and the mayor continues to challenge CPS to do several things. We need to work faster to turn schools around. We need to work faster to reduce the dropout rate. We need to work faster to increase the number of our kids that are going on to college. Turning these numbers around will require dramatic and systematic change in the system. There are some who actually think that we can fix CPS with a few tweaks, or by turning a blind eye to very difficult choices. I can tell you that I do not share those views. There are people who believe in the status quo or think that we should go back to the way things were 20 years ago. Many cases they're defensive because more times than not, they benefit from it. I'm not one of them. The status quo doesn't work. It hasn't worked. It wasn't working. And frankly, there isn't any time left for more explanations or excuses. Fortunately, I think there's a lot of reason to be hopeful. Across the country, we're seeing profound changes in public education. The federal government is using its dollars as a carrot and as a stick in ways that it's never done before. A common core curriculum and standards are being adopted across the country, including here in Illinois. And teachers are beginning to embrace programs that provide better measuring tools for student progress and for meaningful evaluations. It is critical that we ride this wave of change here in Chicago and the state of Illinois. That means cultivating a culture of performance that demands success from all of us and holds us all accountable to students and parents. While I'm going to go into more detail into that later, let me briefly explain to you what I mean by a culture of performance. For students, it means placing their success at the forefront of everything that we do. It means ensuring that they're coming to school prepared to learn. It means core curriculum standards and ongoing assessment to track their progress so that as a system we can make real-time adjustments to ensure that every kid is successful. It also means giving them more time in the classroom each day and working with community partners to keep them safe when they're not in schools. For teachers, it means giving them the resources, the training, and the flexibility needed to be highly effective teachers. It means developing a common language and set of expectations for what great teaching looks like. It means having real teacher evaluations that reward those teachers who are effective and simply replaces and removes those who are not. For principals and school administrators, this new approach means giving them more autonomy and more authority over resources and decision-making needed to drive student achievement, while at the same time holding them more accountable than ever to use data to ensure that every single student is learning. For CPS Central Office, for citywide staff, and for the system as a whole, a new culture of performance means radically rethinking what we do to support principals and teachers. It means that if you don't work in a school, there's one bottom line. How are you helping principals and teachers ensure that our students succeed? It means us giving parents the information they demand to make good decisions. Parents have a right to know. My son just turned 1 year old a month ago. In the next few years, he will be attending a Chicago public school. If I look at the neighborhood school that's right around the corner from my house in Chicago, I can tell you the first thing that crosses my mind and what crosses parents' minds across the city when they send a kid to our school, am I getting a good teacher? I believe it is a fundamental right of our parents to know how their teachers are doing, teacher by teacher. There are many who criticize CPS on all kinds of issues for all types of reasons. And you know what? I agree with much of what they're saying. We are too centralized. We tolerate ineffective teachers, principals, vendors, and staff. We fail to celebrate those teachers who go the extra mile for our kids every single day. We spend too much money outside the classroom, and we're not as transparent as we need to be. We are, in all cases, have been aggressively working to try to address all of these issues. We're shifting more and more of our resources to schools as we continue to reduce our central office. 18 months after I took over as CPS, there are over 1,200 and fewer individuals who work outside of schools in the system. Our budget process is more transparent than ever. All CPS salaries are now available online. We're listing consultants and vendors and payments and check payouts to everyone. All you have to do is go to our website and you can find firsthand what we're doing. We've closed and turned around 19 schools that are failing our kids. And we made the decision earlier this year to lay off our most ineffective teachers before anyone else in the district. And we have 120 schools that are opening this year with brand new principals. While this is a start, it's simply not enough. You may know that last week the U.S. Department of Education awarded Race to the Top grants to 10 different states. Illinois was not one of them. This shows that we have much more to do structurally on how we educate Illinois kids, including at CPS. It should serve as a wake-up call to those who refuse to stand with our kids and with our parents and embrace the changes that we need to accomplish to get this done. I've been asked by lots of different people why we didn't win Race to the Top. Are folks saying, was this Arnie Duncan trying to not show favoritism to Illinois? Was it an application problem? What was it? To me, it's very simple. We didn't go far enough. And if you look at how far other states went, they were bolder. They put their kids in front much further, much faster, much more aggressively, and therefore they won the dollars. And I think that's a wake-up call. There's not enough time to settle for excuses or why something isn't working or won't work. There's only a great demand from our students, their parents, all of our communities. We must come together to not only meet their expectations, but we need to exceed them. Before I jump into more detailed explanations of how we're going to address all of these problems that I've laid out, I want to take a few moments and talk just a little bit about our district to give you some perspective. As I mentioned, we have 410,000 students who are enrolled in over 680 schools. That makes CPS the third largest system after New York and Los Angeles. With about 40,000 employees and a budget of $6.6 billion, we're the second largest employer in the city, followed only by the federal government. And by the way, I often scratch my head and wonder, what are more than 40,000 federal government employees doing? It is a quandary, and if someone can get to that answer, would you please share it with me? Even with recent layoffs, CPS employs almost as many employees as Advocate Healthcare, Walgreens, and JP Morgan combined. If you were to think of us as a corporation, we would rank 337 on the Fortune 500 list. Think about that. We would be the 337th largest corporation in the world on the Fortune 500 list. Our student population is as diverse as our city. 45% of our students are African American, 41% are Hispanic, 9% are white, and 4% are Asian American. Over 85% of our students are on the free or reduced lunch or breakfast program, meaning that they live near or below the poverty line. Give that a thought for a minute, right? If you think about the importance of us succeeding, 85% of our kids are in the free or reduced lunch program, right? That means that as far as the federal government is concerned, right, these kids can't afford to buy milk, right? And we need to provide it for free, and we're grateful that we can do it. Under our umbrella of 680 schools, we have traditional, we have neighborhood-based, as well as a variety of other options, including magnet, special education, gifted, classical. We have career and military academies. We oversee 82 charter schools. Collectively, all of these systems make up the Chicago Public School systems. With the dollars that we receive, we run a complex year-round operation. It includes day school, night school, summer school, year-round school, after-school tutoring, bilingual education, early childhood, special education, sports, vocational training, transportation, food service, and more. Why do I point these things out? I point these things out to help you understand and appreciate that CPS is a complex integrated system. There is not one simple change that we can make, but many changes that need to happen simultaneously for this system to succeed. As you can imagine, in a $6.6 billion organization, systemic change is not easy, and it does not come without resistance. And in fact, when you try to change a system that is that big and impacts that many lives, change is hard and change is resisted. I think it is incumbent upon all of us collectively to face that resistance when it comes to improving outcomes for our kids. A few minutes ago, I shared some troubling statistics regarding our high school students. But let me be clear. I believe that CPS has come a very long way in the last 15 years to improve the quality of education that we provide. There are some who say, and are saying, that we should go back to the good old days before mayoral control. I'd like to remind everyone of what those days look like. In the 1980s, an Illinois state authority controlled the Chicago public school system. The agency set and determined the policies of the district, they hired the superintendent, and they had final sign-off on the district's budget. Schools, particularly those in our poorest neighborhoods, completely went to shambles. In 1980, Chicago teachers went on strike. In 1983, they went on strike again. 1984, again. 1985, again. 1987, again. You may remember that in that same year, Secretary William Bennett went so far at that point as to call the Chicago public school systems, and this was his quote, the worst in the nation. And in the end, it was our kids who were getting hurt. In 1988, an education reform bill passed in Springfield, establishing the local school councils, which I believe many of you are aware of, that created a new level of accountability and community oversight over our schools. And then in 95, which is just 15 years ago, the city won back control of the school system as a result of major school reform that was championed by Mayor Daley. The district superintendent was replaced by a CEO and a board of education appointed by the mayor. Local control over the budget and the decision-making process was restored to the city and the local level. To say that CPS was in bad shape at that time is an understatement. Fewer and fewer students were graduating. Schools never opened on time. The infrastructure was crumbling and the city's residents lacked confidence in the city's ability to educate our kids. And the way that we saw this happen in every pocket of the city is you had families fleeing the city. They were leaving because they had absolutely no confidence that they could send their kid to a school down the block and ensure that that child had a chance to succeed. The path that we are on now was not easy. If you take a look at what happened under Paul Vallis, huge strides were taken to stabilize the district's finances and rebuild crumbled schools. Under Arnie, aggressive expanded use of alternative school models were sought to give parents and students more choices. It's hard to believe that just a few years ago we had absolutely no charter schools in the city. They both took an aggressive stance to turn around schools that were failing kids. As we begin this upcoming 2011 school year, this year's seniors will only be the 4th class to go through this new system. And while I would argue that their experience has been dramatically better than those that came before them, there are tremendous challenges that we face. We can't be afraid to tackle them, and we can no longer wait. I want to provide one last bit of context to our conversation before I dive into some of the meat of the things that we'd like to change. As all of you know, Illinois is facing the greatest fiscal crisis of our generation. The state's inability to pay its bills has had a dramatic impact on public education everywhere in the state. No district has been spared, including the Chicago public school system. Those realities were placed at the very forefront of a public conversation recently when the district was forced to close a $1 billion budget deficit. We were able to cut the deficit through temporary pension relief, the restoration of some state funds, one-time emergency funding sources. But we weren't able to close the remaining $370 million to balance our budget without layoffs, programmatic cuts, and draining our reserves. None of these figures include the $236 million the state still owes the district from last fiscal year. We have no idea when the state will repay us. We are concerned that this trend is going to continue. From my good old days at the CTA, this is no way to run a railroad. There are some people who would say, don't worry, the money's going to come from somewhere. They clearly do not have a full appreciation for what it is that we're dealing with. We cannot and will not be able to wish our way away from our budget problems. They are real, and they're going to require difficult decisions. Even before the current crisis hit, Illinois ranked 49th out of 50 states in the percentage of funding provided to school districts by the state. The 50th state is Nevada, but if you peel the onion on how Nevada divides its money up to schools, a huge percentage of their money comes from the gaming industry. So for all practical purposes, Illinois is dead last in terms of funding schools. Despite all of this, we still have a responsibility to our students and their parents. They don't care if we're 49th in funding, 50th in funding, 1st in funding. All they care about is that their kids have the right and the ability to walk into a school and get a good education. So where are we today, and what is it that we need to do? Over 200 of our schools are still failing by almost any yardstick you put against it. These are schools where many students' achievement is very low, and in too many cases, simply not improving. At the end of the day, nothing matters more than the success of our students and the success of our teachers in educating those students. While most agree that we need to evaluate performance, there's not as much agreement on how we should do it. We don't have a common understanding of what great teaching looks like, so we struggle to identify our highest and lowest achieving teachers. Yet every single teacher, almost, in the system, and almost all of our students can tell you exactly who the great teachers are in their building and which ones no parents hopes to get. That's beginning to change, and in Chicago, it's changing right now. For the first time ever, for the most part, the country is adopting new Common Core standards. These new standards that were adopted by the Illinois State Board of Education, and I want to recognize and thank the Board of Education for their leadership in getting these new standards adopted earlier this year, map out exactly what it is that we expect our students to know and when we expect them to know it. We're offering new tools that help teachers and principals understand where our students are on the learning path at any moment from K to 12th grade. Now think about that for a second. We have struggled as public education to define what a 3rd grader should know. Right? This is a fundamental change in education in this country, right? We're going to have a uniform, clear standard across the country, right, that are fewer standards that are clear about what we expect kids to know. And these standards are higher, and these are standards that we can all believe that when a child masters, they will be able to succeed in college and in the global workforce. If you take a look at this under the old system, teachers would teach all year, not fully knowing if their students were advancing at the right pace. Students would take a test at the end of the year, and it was only then that the teacher would actually get the data back that they needed to know if their students were moving at the pace they needed to move to succeed. Over the last year, we've used shorter and more frequent real-time assessments across the city to help our teachers identify at-risk students early on and chart a path for them to succeed before it's too late. More frequent information also gives principals and administrators the ability to direct resources like professional development. Now think of this in a slightly different way, right? Think of it as a corporation again. Think of it if we have the responsibility for 410,000 kids, right? But we didn't have the information for those 410,000 kids to say, this kid is failing, this kid's succeeding, this kid needs extra help, right? We have a path and a system forward that will tell us child by child, teacher by teacher. I'd like to recognize two people who are with in the crowd today. We have the principal here of Bontemps School, Principal Alan Mosley, and he's joined by Felicia Kiles. That's one of his teachers. Can you guys stand up for a minute while I talk about you? Thanks. So why have I asked you to come? I've asked you to come because change is very hard in a system like ours. Bontemps is a school where we came in and we said, we're not happy with the results. We want change, right? And Principal Mosley, in different positions, has been at Bontemps for 21 years in the Englewood community, right? It's a school with a lot of heart, but not the success that we needed. Putting forth new systems of assessment that measured kids regularly, integrating new practices, this year at Bontemps, the school went from 59% of their kids completing math at grade level to 70%, right? That is a 1-year increase. And I have Ms. Kiles here, right? Because for the area that Ms. Kiles teaches in, if you compare Mrs. Kiles' growth in math to everyone around her in her area, right? I can tell you across 200 schools, she has done more to grow her kids in that subject than any other teacher. I said I wish I could clone you and replicate you and put you in front of kids across this city. But we are so proud of the work that you're doing, and I think you are the demonstration for us, right? That when we can adopt new practices that measures kid by kid with new innovative practices, that there's not a kid or a school in the city that we can't ensure succeeds. So thank you for your tremendous work. I think it's clear that we have to be honest with ourselves, right? That every teacher is not born a highly effective teacher. But it certainly doesn't mean that most of our teachers can't be. It comes down to identifying which teachers are effective, who needs help and providing extra training, who needs more professional development, right? And who's not capable or should not be in front of children because at the end of the day, they won't move kids forward. Everything we do is built on a new framework for teaching and learning that we're testing this year. The new system that's being developed by a very highly talented team of educators, which includes teachers and principal, clearly identifies and evaluates what great teaching looks like. It uses both objective and subjective data and gives us a common language to talk about how teachers are doing. We know that this approach works because we already piloted 2 similar programs on a smaller scale this year that reinforce the dire need for the new system. Under the old system, teachers are evaluated based on rudimentary compliance-oriented checklist. So imagine that you're evaluating a teacher, right? And we think of teachers as professionals, highly educated individuals who are trusting with our most important asset, our kids. And when we pull the evaluation that existed, what's on that checklist, right? And it's a checklist that says strength, weakness, or does not apply, right? Here's some of the examples of what's on there. Writes a lesson plan. Doesn't speak our kids' learning, doesn't speak to the quality of that. It says, do they write a lesson plan, right? Yes, no, does not apply. Takes attendance. Yes, no, does not apply. Comes professionally dressed. Yes, no, or does not apply. This is no way to measure teacher effectiveness. This is no way to know or understand whether our students are getting the greatest amount of knowledge that they can and are truly moving at their greatest percentage. Let's look at what the numbers look like for that. So under the system, 87% of our teachers were receiving a superior or an excellent rating. It's pretty good, right? 87%, right? We should be rocking and rolling as a district, right? Yet by the 11th grade, right? Let me sober you up here, right? By the 11th grade, only 1/3 of our students are meeting state standards in reading at their grade level. 1/3. And 29% are meeting state standards in math, right? So we have an evaluation system that says we're universally providing wonderful, great teaching, right? But there's a disconnect because our students aren't learning the way they need to. And what we know from teachers like Ms. Kiles is that when you put a great teacher in front of a kid, those kids grow and they succeed and they learn. There's nothing that I can say or that I will say that in any way justifies these results. Under the pilot programs that have been put forth, teachers and principals not only reported that the observation, the evaluation process was reliable, valid, and rigorous, but for the first time, it actually began to differentiate performance for teachers. For the first time, there's real differentiation in scores. That is a step in the right direction. I know that there are some who will always reject the use of test scores as a measuring stick for kids and educators. Some of them want to have it, in many ways, both ways. They claim subjective ratings from principals are not fair. They claim objective ratings based on test scores are not fair. What I think they're really saying, don't evaluate us teachers at all. And that, to me, is wholly unacceptable. The reality is that we must create a system that balances both the subjective professional judgment of our principals and peers of teachers, and we need the objective results that come from data. This has been making a lot of news, actually, just in the last 72 hours. Yesterday, there was a front-page story in the New York Times about value-added data. The LA Times just put out a series that's been called very controversial about using value-add data to try to suggest how teachers are doing. The Wall Street Journal had an editorial this morning relative to evaluating teachers. And there's a lot of debate. Does value add make sense or does it not make sense? Value add sounds like very fancy something statistical. Let me break down what all of the value add is. Value add is the following. It asks, where was a student the first day they came into class? Where were they at the end of that year, and how much growth occurred? Value add by design is designed to protect a teacher from a student that may show up that's 1 or 2 or 3 grade levels behind. And what value add as a system, in essence, tries to say is, we're not concerned where that child was when they walked through their door. What we're really concerned is how much growth happened from the time they walked in that door until later in that school year. And there's going to be a lot of debate about value add. Some people are going to say it's broken, right? All of the PhDs will come out of the woodwork and opine in lots of different ways about value add. I would like to ground all of you in thinking about value add this way. Think of value add like a car, right? And someone who comes out and says, I don't think value add works, is suggesting a car doesn't work, right? You may have a bad alternator. It may not be properly calibrated. You may have the wrong size tires on your car. These are all adjustments in a mathematical formula. But when someone says that value add doesn't work, I simply disagree. It is simply a measurement to say how much changed in the course of time. There is no evaluation system that exists almost anywhere in the world that doesn't use 2 points in time to try to measure change or growth. Evaluation systems are absolutely critical. Our teachers are the most important asset we have in the Chicago public school system. Being able to measure this in an effective way is absolutely critical for us. We know that for many, using data is new and it's unfamiliar. For others, confronting some of the hard numbers that I talked about is very unsettling. Regardless, we have to take and face the brutal facts that the data is showing us. That's why during our budget crisis, we first laid off teachers who received unsatisfactory ratings. This was the first time that we've ever done this, and it was the right thing to do. It is never an easy decision to lay off any teacher. But if we're serious about improving the success of our students, then we can't worry about the harmony of the adults. And if you take a look at all of the hoopla that happened when we laid off unsatisfactory teachers first, what was that conversation about? It wasn't about the kids, right? It was about the adults. I asked the leadership of our teachers union to join us in our efforts to remove ineffective teachers from our school. I asked them not to fight us. Earlier this year, we took action to remove the district's lowest performing principals that were overseeing failing schools. Today, we've got new principal and new staff are breathing life into our schools at a time when many of these schools need it most. And the excitement and innovation they bring to the table is having a dramatic impact on our teachers and students who are learning so much more. Think about it, 120 of our schools, many of the lowest performing, are opening their doors this year with brand new teachers. Michelle Willis, where are you? From Gillespie. Michelle, stand up for a second here. Michelle is the principal at Gillespie School. And what year is this for you at Gillespie, Michelle?
I've been at 3 years.
3 years. 4th year, exactly right. I'm going to tell you what happened over the last year at Gillespie, right? Gillespie is a school that I had originally proposed for a school action, which means I wanted to close it down, right? Under Michelle's leadership, she came in and she put what I would say were lines in the sand. At Gillespie, the kids came first. And she took the very difficult action, right, to reward and motivate and keep her brightest talent in the building. right? She also worked very hard to remove those teachers that were ineffective in her building, and Gillespie has gone from being a school that we considered for school action under her leadership to one of the shining gems of the system. Just last year, let me give you the growth. Her math went from 40% passing state standards to 50%, reading from 43 to 51, science from 42 to 51. For a school to make those gains, when we're a system that celebrates 1% to 3% gains, right? She's blowing our socks off, right? And it's new principals like yourself. It is the hard work of educators who are putting kids first that are making the difference. Let's give her a round of applause for her great work at Gillespie. We've taken a hard line on removing those principals that we believe are not serving kids. We're doing everything to support all of the principals we have in place to make sure that they're doing everything they can to be successful. We need to ensure that our central office does its part to help get the job done as well. First, we've got to get smaller, and we have. As I've said earlier today, we've reduced the number of employees that are teaching, that are outside of classrooms by over 1,250 positions. Additionally, this year's budget shifts spending from our central office directly to our schools and areas, pushing additional decision-making authority down to those who are closest to our students. Second, we need to fundamentally rethink the way we provide services to schools, right? Currently, if you still think about it, 30% of our dollars are not controlled by a principal. 6% better than last year, but much further to go. And as I said before, there can only be one job at central office, and that is to support the work of our teachers and our principals. The third thing we have to be is be much more strategic in expanding school models that work. I firmly believe that if we have a school method that works, we shouldn't care what it is. Charter school, contract school, traditional school, magnet schools. If you have a school concept that's working, we need to do everything we can to harness the energy, to duplicate it, and grow its best practices. Fourth thing we need to do, we need to aggressively address schools that are not serving our kids, and they must be held accountable. For this reason, we will continue to close and turn around our worst performing schools. Again, whether they're traditional, contract, charter, or any other kind of school. For those of you who watch this on the news, you see how unpopular it is, right? I had folks show up at my house last year. There are tents in front of the Board of Education. We had hundreds of people come to protest to not close schools. But when you have a school, such as we turned around this year, as Phillips High School and Marshall High School, where 2% of the students are reading and doing math at grade level, we cannot walk away from those difficult decisions. Those schools need to close, they need to be reconstituted, and we need new people in the door. I also talked about alternative school models, right? I'm lucky enough today, with us today, one of the principals of the Noble Charter of Schools, Principal Pablo Sierra. Pablo, I saw you in the back there somewhere, right here. Can you stand up, Pablo? Pablo oversees Pritzker Noble Street Charter School. Now, let me give you something that when I saw these numbers blew my mind. There's something called gains on the ACT, right? Most of you know the ACT, right? You use it. It's nationally recognized. Kids use it to get into college. And there's a measure on there which is expected gains, which is how many students are making, based on a national level, the expected gains you would anticipate they make each year academically. What the Noble Street Charter group of schools are doing is changing the equations of what high school success can be like, right? Who's heard of Walter Payton? Who's heard of Northside Prep? Who's heard of Whitney Young, right? How many have known a student who's had to take a difficult test and go through a difficult process to try to get into one of these gems of the system, right? These are selective enrollment schools. The Noble Street Charter of Schools are not selective, right? They use a lottery to take any kid that goes through the lottery to get into their school. They beat Walter Payton, Whitney Young, North for the amount of kids making expected gains on the ACT. That is miraculous. Think about this for a minute, because I didn't believe it when I first saw it, right? I said, you've got to go back and rerun these numbers. You have to double check this, because I'm not going to get up there and look like a fool, right? So look at the expected gains. Go back and take a look at all of that information. And let me tell you something. It's absolutely true. It doesn't take anything away from our selective enrollment schools. Those are amazing institutions of education that help kids. But what this shows you is when you have a school operation that works incredibly well, right? And you get school culture right, and you work to get the best teachers, and you work to evaluate those teachers, and you get the wrong folks out, it shows you that in the schools that they have, and by the way, these schools are in every tough neighborhood in Chicago, right? These aren't schools that are creaming kids at all. Those kids can succeed like any other kid in the system. We need to go away from the noble streets being the exceptions and the stars to the norms of our system. But if we learn from the noble streets of the world, we can do it. The last thing I'll say is you hear rhetoric against charter schools. You hear people who say, we should close those down, we shouldn't have any more. Who wants to deny the kids that get to go to one of the 7+ Noble Street campuses from a neighborhood the opportunity to succeed in the way that they're enabling, right? These are lines in the sand. These are things that we must all stand for. So thank you for your leadership, and thank you for the wonderful work that the Noble Street campuses do. And finally, we need to do a better job explaining what all this means to our parents, and we have to give parents the information that they need to make the best decision for their parents. By this, I mean that data gained through the district's new evaluation processes are going to be used to grade schools and identify their strengths and their weaknesses. We're going to provide this information in an easy-to-understand format to all parents so that they can use it to make choices about where to send their kids and to help drive change at their school. Parents are our critical ally in the process of improving our schools. We as CPS must do a better job of giving them critical information so they in turn can hold us accountable school by school. I want to talk next about what it takes to create an environment where our kids can succeed. What else needs to happen? Every teacher and a student in our school will tell you that students have a greater chance of succeeding if they come to school ready to learn. We know they'll do better in the classroom. But the first thing is it starts with them feeling safe. If they don't, then nothing else we do as a school system to educate our kids will matter. To that end, I want to tell you about what we're doing to provide a safe haven for our kids from the violence that's plaguing them across the city. I spent most of my remarks talking about this last time I came before City Club. What I want to say is that I believe these programs are going to work and they're going to make a difference, but only as part of working with parents, community groups, faith-based institutions, not-for-profits, CAPS, the Chicago Police Department, to get this right. We have to think of school safety as all hands on deck from every corner of this city in every way to drive a big difference. I can tell you that as a former police officer who served on the front lines and now is the chief of school, that there is a direct correlation between instability on our streets and our students' ability to succeed and focus inside our schools. That, as I've said, this is not just a CPS problem. This is something we all need to solve together, or we will continue to read about these tragedies every single day. Keeping kids safe isn't the only thing that we have to do. We need to make sure that they're healthy. We need to make sure that they're well fed. If they aren't, then they will never be able to focus and ensure that they're learning. Most of our kids get 2 meals at our schools. We serve over 500,000 meals a day. In fact, this year we launched breakfast in the classroom at 182 schools. What that means is that every kid who walks through the door gets a bag. And in that bag includes a piece of fresh fruit, a granola bar, milk, juice, healthy foods. And because of it, we are on target this year to serve over an additional 6 million free or subsidized meals to our students this year, because every kid gets one every day that they walk in the door. Those meals are healthier than they've ever been. They include fresh fruits and vegetables every day. And no, we're not counting ketchup as a vegetable or a fruit, right? French fries is not counting as our vegetable. As you know, a huge percent of our students don't have access to healthy food, and many of our students are significantly overweight. This year, our food service will not just meet, but we're going to significantly exceed First Lady Michelle Obama's Healthier U.S. challenges, right? Thanks to the leadership that's at the table right over there, Louise, and others, we blew up food service this year. We threw it out the door, and we said we're starting over. Our food service standards are so much healthier. Finally, we need to extend the school day. As many of you have read recently, Chicago has the shortest day in the country. Compared to the national average, our kids get 200 fewer hours in the classroom each year. And if you look at us, compare us to New York, Houston, places like that, LA, it's 250 hours less. Let's say that you are a parent of a kindergarten student in Houston, Texas. This is Texas, right? We always assumed we're smarter than Texas, right? Maybe not. Maybe it's a north versus south thing. I don't know. But what I'll say is if you have your child start kindergarten year in Houston, Texas, by the time that student graduates high school in Houston, Texas, they will have been in school the equivalent of 4 more years. 4 more years, right? How are our students going to compete for those scholarships to get into college? Well, let me tell you, it's going to be very, very hard. These are appalling statistics. We are at the rock bottom for the amount of hours our kids spend in front of a teacher for instruction. Unfortunately, if we take a look at how we solve this problem, and yes, the ideal first way to solve it would be with our traditional workforce. But if we wanted to just extend our school day 60 minutes, and by the way, if we added 60 minutes to the school day, we're still rock bottom. That would cost the district over $300 million if we use existing salary levels on our current collective bargaining agreements, right? $300 million for 60 minutes, and 60 minutes doesn't get us there. We simply must find solutions that we can afford to get this done. Just 2 weeks ago, Mayor Daley and I announced a pilot project at 15 schools to provide after-school interactive computer-based math and reading programs. This is a cost-effective way to keep our kids in the classroom and provide them with more critical, individualized learning time. This new process will enable our students to gain an additional 25% instructional time in the school online, and I'm very convinced it's going to have a very positive effect on our students. We need to ensure that a diploma at CPS can compete with a diploma from anywhere else in the world. That is simply not going to happen until we address the inequity that exists in our schools relative to the school day and access to technology. If you were to go to the North Shore, right, which many of you probably will go to the North Shore, or other affluent communities, you won't go into a home with kids without a computer in it, right? You won't find in those homes where there's a computer in it, with those kids not taking some form of an educational booster. They're online doing some kind of program that helps them achieve. Our kids deserve to have the same access. This pilot program is not only about giving our kids a fair chance in terms of the amount of time they have to learn, but we're saying our kids deserve the same access to that software. They need the same ability to move ahead. They need the same ability to get those really dynamic programs that literally leaps kids forwards. None of what I've talked about is going to be easy, but that doesn't mean that we should slow down. It doesn't mean that we should settle for the status quo. And it certainly doesn't allow for explanations and excuses to trump the need for immediate reform and accountability throughout CPS. I've got with us here today Vera Williams-Willis from AltGelt. Vera, do you want to stand up for a second? You know I didn't drag you all the way down here if I wasn't going to talk about you, Vera. I met Vera my second week on the job, and I've had the opportunity to go back to AltGelt school in Inglewood. Why did I go there 2 weeks on the job, and why do I keep going back, right? Because Vera doesn't believe in excuses. AltGelt is a school that is right in the heart of Inglewood. It is a neighborhood school where all of the kids come from Inglewood, and the majority of her kids are succeeding. They're succeeding because no one is saying, right, no one at AltGelt school stops and says, our kids can't learn because there's domestic violence at home. Our kids can't learn because someone's getting shot down the street. Our kids can't learn because they don't have the gift, right? At AltGelt school, they don't accept excuses. No one else should accept excuses. They have proven how a school can work. Vera doesn't get any extra resources. She doesn't get any extra money, right? She gets what CPS gives her, which is not a lot, right? She takes those dollars, she works with her teachers, and they work every single day, student by student, to make sure that those schools succeed. And because of that, you can take a look at any other school that has a brand name in the city of Chicago, right? What do I mean by a brand name, right? Nettlehorse, Burley, and Blaine, right? Those schools, who's heard of those schools? Who'd heard of AltGelt before? Well, let me tell you something. Some of you, good. AltGelt in the heart of Inglewood is doing every bit as good as those schools are doing, right? And I say that because that's leadership, that's putting excuses to the side, and it's leaders like Vera Williams-Willis at that school who has drawn that line in the sand on behalf of our kids, and I thank you for it. Let's give her a round of applause. And not to worry, I'm finishing up here. The decisions that we make today are going to impact the next generation of Chicago public school students and many more. Criticism of the Chicago public school system is okay. I actually think it's healthy, as long as that criticism focuses on what's the best interest to educate our kids. To defend the status quo is to sentence our kids to another generations of policies and programs that we simply know are not adequate. I'm not willing to settle for mediocrity or going back into the past. Many of us often heard the mayor ask publicly and privately, right? How are we going to be a world-class city if we don't demand a world-class public education system. And the mayor is absolutely right. CPS can be the most successful, highest performing school district in this country. In order to get this done, not only do we need radical change in CPS, not only do we need substantially more accountability, not only do we need meaningful evaluation that tells us exactly how much every member of the Chicago Public School System is doing on behalf of kids, but we're going to need Springfield and Washington to do their part. Temporary fixes, such as the stimulus bill and the education job bills, are helpful and they're appreciated. But none of those are going to take the place of difficult decisions and reforms which we all know need to be carried out. Leading the Chicago Public School System is the greatest challenge that I and our team will likely ever face in our lifetimes. We know that the ideas to fix the problems that exist today are not going to come from us. They're going to come from parents, they're going to come from teachers, they're going to come from principals, and many others like you in this room. We don't have a minute to spare. Instilling this new culture of performance will take the concerted efforts of all of us, right? And in the end, what should this look like? In the end, we need to make sure, by making all of these changes and taking all of these issues head on, that our kids are safe in our schools and our communities, that every parent has quality options of neighborhood-based schools that they can send their kids to, that we will fill every one of our classrooms and schools with high-performing teachers and high-performing principals, that we will hold those teachers and principals and all CPS staff, including the leadership, vendors, consultants, all of us, accountable to the outcomes of our kids, that we will reward and that we will celebrate good teachers, and that we will not shy away from replacing ineffective ones, and that we will increase the amount of time our kids have in the classroom. So they've got more time to learn, they've got more time to prepare for college and the global workforce. These are our goals. And I feel very confident that together, if we're willing to make the difficult choices, if we're willing to confront the status quo, if we're willing to put our kids in front of the needs of the comfort of the adults, then we're going to be able to transform CPS from the system it is today to the system that I know we all believe it can be and should be. Thank you.
Ron ran a little long, so I know there's a lot of questions. Probably go up and see him after this, but we always end at 1:30. But that was one hell of a presentation. How about a big round of applause? These are the gratuities all speakers get. Ron, I think, has enough for an 8 membership.
I'm going to be able to give one to every student at Alkel team.
And a history of the City Club.
Great. Thank
Round
you.
of applause. We are adjourned.